listening to Stories from Real Life, a podcast by engaging storytellers for engaged story listeners. Here's your host, author and journalist, Melvin E. Edwards.
Hello again, and welcome to this November 4th edition of Stories from Real Life. I'm your host, Melvin E. Edwards. Because of the election tomorrow, I decided to release this episode a day early. Thanks for joining me on today's storytelling journey. Our guest this week is Dr. Casey Jacobowski. Let's find out more about Casey before we begin our conversation.
On today's episode of Stories from Real Life with Melvin E. Edwards, our guest, Casey Jacobowski, PhD, founded DragonTamer.us to help people and teams move from okay to outstanding. After 20 years in education, team building, and improvement processes, Casey is a Lean, Six Sigma, and MBTI practitioner. He has written 6 books on citizen engagement, overcoming bullying, and improving American schools. Let's meet this week's stories from real-life guest Casey Jacobowski and your host, Melvin E. Edwards.
Good morning, Casey, and welcome to this week's podcast.
Good morning, Melvin, and thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you here. So my first question for you is, what are these dragons you're trying to tame?
You know, it's a wonderful, wonderful analogy for conflict, and I view it as a conflict dragon tamer emerged because in my role as a professional developer and as a business coach and client and somebody who also works with others, I see those as conflicts internal, conflicts external, and also more importantly, your self-conflict. We have a lot of great people out there who get stuck because they have imposter syndrome. That, to me, is one of the biggest dragons that needs to be tamed. People don't feel like they belong. A second dragon that I think needs to be tamed is conflict management in and of itself. So many teams implode because they don't realize how important it is to deal with the conflict that they may have. And I define conflict as 4 levels: surface, process, product, and then your values. And Melvin, for your listeners out there, a surface conflict may be something that's really, really, really shouldn't be causing conflict. I notice you have a map of Texas behind you. I'm from upstate New York. I will say the Buffalo Bills are better than the Dallas Cowboys. On the surface,
I'm okay with that as long as you don't mention the Texans, because we know the Texans are better.
Exactly. But that's a surface level conflict because it's not that big of a deal. But a deeper conflict may be if we were in a team situation together and you had offered a suggestion. I went, no, that's not really relevant. And you're like, whoa, wait a minute, what's going on here? And so the question becomes is, why am I not valuing you? And so as a conflict dragon tamer, I work with people individually. I work with them in groups. I also work with medium-sized companies, small companies, to try and get to the root as to why they have conflict dragons. They need to be tamed.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, so you mentioned that you work with clients and teams to understand improvement. So how do you develop the type of processes needed for each individual group?
Oh, that's a great question, Melvin. One of the things that I focus in on is authenticity. We find that there are so many people out there who do canned programs, or they have canned workshops that they'll just come in and do something that they've done for 10,000 other folks before. Yet every situation is unique, and I really want to get to know people. I really want to understand, is it something where everybody is smiling on the surface, or is it that those smiles are covering deep-seated anxieties or anger? And as I work with people and as I get to know their stories, I really try to work with their strengths, because so many places focus in on improving deficits. Yet, why would you do that? It's a waste of time. It's a waste of talent. And also, more importantly, it's a waste of people's mindset. Because if you're always constantly focusing in on deficits, you never get the opportunity to focus in on your strengths. One of the greatest moments I had was working with a rural church in the Eastern Shore of Maryland, who they were conflicting against their selves. The Sunday people, as they call them, so the pastoral care folks, really had problems with the business people, and vice versa, because the Sunday people wanted to do their pastoral care, but they didn't understand that in order to do that work, there needed to be a business backing. So let's go to Appalachia, they said. The business people are like, whoa, wait, time out. How are we going to do it? How are we going to raise money? And the answer was, well, we'll figure it out when we get there. And the business response was, we can't. We have to keep the lights on and the doors open. We need to have a plan. So what I did was I asked them, what are your goals? What are your processes? And more important, what do you believe in? And that question, what do you believe in, was such an eye-opener. Because for the Monday through Friday business people, a lot of them were like, yep, this is a job. I go home. Whereas the Sunday people were like, I live and breathe this. This is my existence. This is my calling. This is my deep-seated nature. So for some folks on the team, it was a Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. For other folks, it was a living, breathing example of their lives. And to get that bridge to cross between the Monday through Friday folks and the Sunday folks took a little bit of time, took a lot of effort, but we had to find alignment in goals. Because if the Sunday folks didn't happen, then the Monday through Friday folks couldn't happen, and vice versa. You need to have an understanding of where the entire team is coming from, not just yourself.
Okay. So you do a lot of work with teachers.
Yes.
And it's interesting that we have a former public school teacher right now on the national presidential ticket, which is, I don't believe has ever happened before. So what kind of advice do you offer to someone who might be interested in a teaching career?
Oh, that's something that I'm so passionate about. I really think that as the author of 7 books about education, which are all available from my publishers and from places you find books from, I would say go in with your eyes open. We need teachers. We need people who are willing to do the hard work of educating our children. But we also need you all to listen to yourself, listen to your body, listen to your mind. It's not easy. A lot of people go into teaching because they believe that it's a calling, it's a passion, but at the end of the day, it is a job. And if you burn yourself out, then you're not going to be valuable to others. The second area I would say to folks who are going into teaching is have reasonable and realistic expectations. There has been a lot of change ever since the 1970s and the 1980s that says that teachers are miracle workers. They are, but from my understanding, the only folks who get recognized for miracles are saints. So you can only do so much. And usually the saints are gone. They've gone on to their reward afterwards before they become saints. So let's try to keep the living people living, okay? The last area that I would say for teachers is make sure you have a good support network, because one of the points that I find is, especially with younger people who go in, they are thinking that they're going to be able to have it all. You can't. What you need to do is you need to recognize that it is a business. It has become excruciatingly transactional over the last 20 years. And what I mean by that is the schools are run like a business. You are an employee of the business. You have two goals that you have to meet: educate the children for state tests and do it in an efficient manner economically. Well, the two can't always work out, especially because we've seen since COVID, the needs are just astronomical, Melvin. I also work with rural folks especially. I've become an expert in rural education. I started life as a suburban kid going to a school not too far away from Buffalo Bills Stadium. And then I went on and I became a rural teacher. And what you do is you learn how to make do with what you have while also trying to provide the best possible education. And I want people to understand this about both rural and urban education. They're two sides of the same coin. They're what's called zones of sacrifice. A lot of times people don't want to recognize that in order to educate an urban child takes 30 to 40 times the amount of resources that the governments will allocate. It takes about that much to educate rural children too. Why is it that we allow suburban schools to offer 4 or 5 different foreign languages, but an urban district or a rural district can only offer one? That's not fair. Why should zip code determine your future in an urban area or in a rural area? And so what I ask people who are going into the teaching profession to do is go in with your eyes open, be ready to do your level best, but also realize it's a business system. And in a business system, you have to understand what you can do, what you should do, and what you can't do, and what you absolutely must not do. And those 4 areas really have a lot to do with what can they afford, what can you afford, and what should you do to help students. And another area that I want people to keep in mind is not only in education, but if you're a parent, if you're somebody who's interested in making your community better, look for ways to leverage resources by cooperation and collaboration. I cannot tell you the amount of times where I see people going out into all different areas and they're trying to solve problems by themselves. If you stop, if you identify your goal and you identify what resources you have, you really can make a huge difference. And I talk about that in my book, Getting to the Hearts of Teaching. Everybody nowadays is all about AI, STEM, all sciencey, engineering, healthcare. But if you don't have the humanities or the arts or the local emphasis, like I talk about in Getting to the Hearts of Teaching, it's irrelevant. And unless we talk about the ethics or unless we talk about the joy of life, I think that museums, I think that art galleries, I think of concerts are always great ways to help make people feel better about themselves. And also not only that, but let's support our artists and our musicians. And what we need to do is we need to refocus in on the humanities, the context. And so that's why I wrote that book, and that's why I tell that story.
Okay, I appreciate that. I do want to delve into each one of your books a little more individually in just a moment, but I have a quick follow-up for the first part of the answer to the last question. So you talked about some of the changes in education over the last 20 years. So what do you think is the hardest part of education in this first part of the 21st century?
Oh, I think that the hardest part is the idea that we have society out there who has really said to educators, meh, we don't care. it was so interesting during COVID when we saw what teachers were trying to do online. Everybody was like, wow, thank a teacher, thank a teacher. And then about 2 months later, after the kids stayed home, they were like, go back to school. We need to get rid of them. I mean, we need them to go back to school, right? So part of it is this idea that people view educators as glorified babysitters, or they will have said things that I find terribly hurtful. If I would have known then what I know now, I necessarily wouldn't have expanded my family. They're like, we need the schools to take care of our children while we're working. My parents taught me something that was so profound, which was when you become a parent, it's not about you anymore, it's about the kids. And I think for a lot of educators, the hardest part is trying to justify what they do day in and day out. And also not only that, but trying to keep parents from reacting in very negative ways when they're trying to work with their child. We're seeing so many discipline issues nowadays where children are coming to school and they've never had a boundary set for them. Or we have children who are coming to school and the minute they don't like doing something, they take off or they create a scene or they have I can't describe it with any better way of saying, but a meltdown. These behaviors, these mental health, these socio-emotional issues are exhausting the field. And as currently a college professor working with students who are first-year students in college, a lot of them are facing mental health issues that are way above and beyond what I had to deal with 30 years ago. But in the K-12 world, it is becoming to the point where schools just don't have enough professionals in the area of counselors or social workers, and teachers are spending inordinate amount of times where they have to clear the classroom because a child is having a meltdown or multiple children are having meltdowns. We have to do something as a society to provide the resources to our schools. We need to increase our mental health capacity within the world, but we also need parents to be part of it. For the parents that have checked out, that's not good. You cannot ask others to babysit your children. I also am very actively involved in volunteer work with Scouts. One of the areas that I find in Scouts is that we are creating great opportunities for leadership development, for people to create awesome learning experiences. But we can't get parents to volunteer. We can't get parents to sign their children up. They're saying things like, oh, it's easier for me to send them to soccer. Oh, it's easier for me to send them to some other program. So what's happening is no slate on sports, because I know for many of your audience folks, they may be checking how the World Series is doing or the NBA season is starting. But one of the points is that sports should be a limit. It shouldn't be the be all and end all to your extracurriculars. You need to have your children willing to be good civic engaged citizens. Playing soccer's nice, but that's recreational. You need to have them be bought into their community so that then when they go to school, they realize that they are representing and that they have to be part of the solution and not part of the problem.
That's a great answer, and actually sums up well why I was so passionate about my involvement as a baseball coach in the American Legion program, because it sort of combined those two elements. Obviously, it was a competitive sports league, but it's also very community oriented. And so we made part of our requirement to be on the team being involved in the community. You had to do something for somebody else. Mm-hmm. And I love that aspect of it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. So you talked about having written 7 books. And so I want to give you a chance to tell me a little bit about each book and what your motivation was for writing that book.
Awesome, Melvin. Thank you. My first book is called Thinking About Teaching. And what I did was I reflected on how I worked in a teaching setting and how we can combine different aspects of different parts of working in a school to create different ideas for people. I reflect on the fact that we need different levels of support, and I came up with the analogy of coffee, tea, and hot chocolate as 3 levels of support. Coffee's really intense. You got to be there. Tea, not so intense, but you got to have that little kick. And then, of course, hot chocolate.
Tea right here.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And hot chocolate, the 3rd level, is that wraparound good feeling that, oh, this person is going to be okay because of hot chocolate. I then go on and I give examples of place-based opportunities. I talk about different and various examples of what happened in the political world when, the previous elections have been up, and how people can also utilize some local combined examples of good, positive interaction with English, with science, with history, to really think about how they can also be inclusive. And I was very honored when thinking about teaching was cited by 2 national social studies and social studies education groups as the book to read on how to be a person who is very inclusive, especially in a rural area. So that was kind of awesome that thinking about teaching got that shout out from 2 amazing scholars in social studies. My second book is called The Cog in the Machine, and what I did there was I reflected on my journey into education and why I left the classroom. It's so important to understand how what you experience as a child and then as a person going to school and then within your career will lead you to stay or go in education. I also talk about a couple of very hurtful moments in my life, bullying, where I was the subject of bullying not only as a young man by other young people, but also my quote unquote colleagues. It's scary when you think about how often a toxic workplace will really drive out folks who may be a little different, who may be not quite exactly from the area, and how I couldn't believe what they did, but I was bullied by my colleagues. We're talking out of our mouth about how to support children, how we're trying to create a safe environment, and yet I was subjected to bullying. And I came up with 4 types of bullies, and I talk about how each type of bully can unintentionally or intentionally hurt people. And what I do is I describe how 4 types of bullies really create an environment that really harms people. And I talk about how they're either intentionally doing it or they're unintentionally bullying. And for that chapter alone, I think buying the book, A Cog in the Machine, is worth it, because for many people who are thinking about leaving education, some of it's because of the toxic work environment they're in. But also part of it is they don't know what there is beyond the classroom. I was very fortunate semi-early in my career to have joined the New York State Education Department as a school improvement liaison. And I had the opportunity to go into other schools and really, really, really work with those hardworking administrators and teachers to try to find ways to do better. Because quite often they were working extremely hard, Melvin, but they weren't working smart. They were trying to do everything when what they really needed to do were a couple of things really well. My third book, and I can't believe how blessed I was to work with 3 amazing co-authors, Matt Rhodes, Kevin Leichman, and Sam Fedich. We did Crush It from the Start, 50 Tips for New Teachers. We actually laid out and designed 50 tips over the course of a school year for new teachers, their mentors, and administrators to understand about what folks are going through. And within our 50 tips for new teachers, we provided not only vignettes and theory, but we also provided practical applications and exercises. Like, how do you prepare to talk to a parent on your very first parent-teacher conference? How do you manage your administrator? Many folks don't realize this, but the art of teaching is also the art of teaching your principal, because many of them don't know what you do. They may have been an educator before, but they've never been a third grade teacher in your building, or they may never have been a high school music teacher, or they've never been a math teacher for middle school. So part of our goal with the 50 Tips for New Teachers was to create ways to help people succeed in their first year, help their mentors mentor them, and help the administration realize what they're doing that either creates negative turnover or how to do a better job of supporting people as they're onboarding. Because, Melvin, I don't know if you or your listeners know this statistic, but we lose 50% of our new teachers by year 5. And I think that number has expanded since COVID. I think we may be creeping closer to 60%.
Wow.
If any industry had a 60% washout rate and didn't ask if you wanted fries with that, we don't have a good industry. That's the scary part. This is one of our fundamental industries, and yet we're losing so many people. I talked to you about my 4th book, Getting to the Hearts of Teaching, where I combine science and humanities and arts all together. That was because I thought there were so many more creative ways to teach your local areas or to reassert civics and humanities in this day and age. Getting to the Hearts of Teaching to me is my almost meditation on how society needs to go back and have good dining room conversations or kitchen tables around civics, around STEM. You know, we find a lot of people, they're not talking about everything. They're only talking about one area. And again, I mentioned this earlier, we have this fetish with STEM. And yet part of the problem is unless you place it in context, I don't know about you, but I really do hope Skynet doesn't come get us or the Matrix. I just, no, thank you. No, thank you. So my next book is called Treasures from Aunt Terry's Attic. It is a immigration story with a little bit of science fiction fantasy in it. It's based on my family's immigration story. It's a children's book for 4th through 7th grade. I did that because I wanted to honor my ancestors. I wanted to honor my relatives who had passed. And I wanted other, especially Polish American children and Ukrainian and Lithuanian and Slovak families to get an idea of what their ancestors faced when they came to America. And so what happens is my niece and my nephew are the stars of the story, along with my great aunt who's passed away. And they touch an object and it's taken back to when that object was created in the story and the scenario. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's also a battle against evil monsters that are trying to take away the magic of those artifacts. And so I'm just so happy to be able to have done that. I'm honored. Helena Kasisis is the illustrator on it. She's a Polish-American person. And I think it would make a great gift, especially if you have a babcia or a jaja, a grandma or a grandpa, and they're looking for a way to help their kids understand how these tradition happens. My last 2 books are very academic books. They're about rural education history, and they look at case studies of how the initial centralized schools were formed, and then how a state continues to pressure rural districts to consolidate, where they're talking about bigger and better. The first one is called Rural Education History, State Policy Meets Local Implementation. The second one is tentatively titled Minerva's Conflict in the Hills. It's going to come out hopefully in early 2025. It's written. It's just going through peer review right now. But one of the interesting points is that we have a lot of movement where urban schools are being told you're too big, you need to break into smaller schools. And yet we have rural schools being told you're too small, you got to become bigger schools. Well, that creates a problem, especially for children, because in those bigger urban schools, the constant changeover as they're breaking apart and reforming schools, it's very financially based. It's very monetarily based. And same thing with rural schools. If you have a rural district that is graduating 100% of its students, they're doing something right. If you have an urban school that's graduating 50% of their students, they're doing something wrong. And I think it all goes back to the fact that we need to, as a society, determine, do we want to have the best education system in the world? Do we want to triple and quadruple and 5 times down on education like Germany and Japan did after World War II? Do we want to be like other places throughout the world that are putting new universities and new colleges into play, whereas as we find out, about 1 college closes a week in the United States? We need to figure out what we're doing. And I think part of it is that we are one of the very few wealthiest countries where going to school at the university level is extremely expensive for individuals. If you go to other places that are part of the G20 or the G7 or the other economic places, I was fortunate enough I did not have to take out student loans because my parents scrimped and saved, and we had a little bit of a family tragedy where my younger brother passed away due to some medical malpractice. So I was able to go and get my degree without needing to worry about taking out loans. I see how other teachers are impacted by this. And, I would again trade my brother back in a second because I miss him so much. But it shouldn't take a tragedy, or it shouldn't take a winning lottery ticket to earn a scholarship. It shouldn't be something where we tell children, yes, you too can go to school, but only if your mom and dad are very wealthy. Or you put yourself into debt for so long that you finally pay off your last student loan when you're in your 60s.
Wow. So do people tend to let their guard down when you're consulting with them, or can they sometimes be skeptical of your message?
It's really interesting. When I get to know people, they do. They find me very open and they let their guard down. Some of them are very skeptical. And I think part of that is because in society, we have created these walls for our own protection. But as somebody who is open, who is honest, who believes in empathy, and I really, really, really want people to understand that I am a person to talk to. People would think, wow, you must have an amazing career, Casey. You have a doctorate. You've written all these books. I've been laid off multiple times due to COVID. I have had a lot of times where what I thought I did was my very best possible. And yet I was still told, I'm sorry, we can't keep you next year. Your services are no longer needed. And it gets frustrating to be somebody who has had that journey. But I look at it as this. I have overcome a number of crises in my life. I have overcome the loss of a younger brother. I've overcome my family with my dad having been laid off when we were younger and having to move. I have had a number of times where I went through relationship issues where somebody walked out on me. And I've had my professional back issues of being laid off. But at the end of the day, what I believe in is this. Every human being is worth. And this human being's worth is worthy. And so I say, I'm going to help you go from okay to outstanding. That's my motto. I want people to realize that they are not getting what they want because of either the system or because of their own internal imposter syndrome. So I can coach them out of their imposter syndrome, which I did. Somebody had been laid off from a major corporation where they had served 20 years and had risen to a regional assistant manager. And during COVID, they were let go because, well, that's what the company decided. By the way, that company had record profits during COVID. So let's not talk about greed for a second. I talked with this person and I said, you know, with your skills and ability and the fact that you know how to do this work, you could do anything up to and including a vice presidential position. And they said, I don't think I can do that. I mean, I was just a buy. And I said, no, look at all of what you've done. And I think for a lot of people, Melvin, it takes a minute where as an outsider, when you say to somebody, look at what you've done, and you start talking to them, not within their own silo, people go, whoa, I have done a lot. And that's part of it. Number one, overcoming your imposter syndrome. Number two, if somebody won't let you in the front door, let's find a side door. Let's find a back door. Let's find a window. Let's find a crawl space. Heck, Santa Claus comes through chimneys. We have to find ways to get in that maybe are outside of the box. And for folks that I've worked with, folks that I've coached, I tell them I am an eternal optimist with enthusiasm. Because at the end of the day, the only negative point that can happen is somebody says no and you start over again. It gets frustrating after a while. It gets upsetting after a while. You get to the doldrums. But I am blessed and honored because when I'm sitting in my chair, feeling my feels and thinking my thoughts, the cat comes up, will sit on my lap, will start purring. I pet her. And you know what? The world is better because of it. And you just get up and you keep going and you find a way to not prove that the other people are wrong, but to reassert that you are awesome. And that's what I help.
That's great. So in preparing for this this podcast today, I've done a little bit of research on you and found out that you have always advocated for underdogs, the underdog.
Yes.
This is a crazy question. Did you watch that TV show when you were a kid? Underdog?
I did. For those of you that may not understand the reference, there was this amazing cartoon called Underdog, and they were a superhero character. And I believe that we have a society of haves and have-nots. And what I try to do is I try to find people who feel that they need support and help. And I try to find ways to advocate for them. I had a teacher last year who just had been beaten up and beaten down, and their personal life had fallen apart tragically and horrifically. When I was told you got to go in to coach the person, the first thing I did was I sat down with them and I said, hi, my name is, I believe in you. I believe the work in you do. I believe that you are here for the right reasons. And more importantly, I believe that what happened last year was a hiccup. They hugged me. And they said, I didn't think anybody ever was going to believe in me because other teachers were saying I couldn't teach. The administration was saying I couldn't teach. Parents were saying I want the other teacher, not this one. And at the end of the day, creative lessons, deep caring for the children, phenomenal understanding of how to deal with emotional crisis from children. Exhausted, burned out, but at the end of the day, there was no reason to not give that underdog hope because they showed up day in and day out. They tried their level best, and more importantly, they cared deeply for the children. I had another teacher, phenomenal individual. I coached the person too, but I coached them to not do so much because they were going so far above and beyond, and they were doing so many favors for people, they were burning themselves out. And one of the aspects that I said to this person was, you have to give only enough that you do what's best for you. You cannot give more than what you can do. If you are burning a candle on three ends, you will snap in the middle and you will consume yourself. Let others pick up some of the burden. Let others understand that if you stop doing X, somebody else has to do X. And what they did was they also, because they had a son, they were a single mother because of a terrible tragedy. They also said, I finally have time for my son. I finally have the mental capacity when I go home to talk with him. It's not that I want people to not do their jobs, but sometimes we're asked to do so much that others aren't given the opportunity to express leadership, or others aren't given the opportunity to work really intensively. And so one point that I've made in thinking about teaching a cog in the machine, 50 tips for new teachers, is you got to make boundaries. You have to have boundaries. You have to say, I will do up to this point, this line in the sand, but no more. Because if I do that, then I cannot do everything else. And there's an economic principle called utility. And the idea within this economic utility is that after a certain point, you don't get anything extra out. So you go and you eat a piece of cake. You get wonderful utility out of that first piece of cake. It's yummy, it's delicious. The second one, not so much. The third one, maybe you should stop eating the cake. And after the fourth one, you're like, I'm sick. So what happens is that we have to look at our pieces of cake. And then we also have to think about, do we really need to eat that one more item? Or do we really need to do that one more task? Often I say, nope, stop, look at what you are doing, look at your core responsibilities. If you don't do this other thing, will it get done? And if the answer is, oh no, it won't get done, then somebody else needs to pick up a piece of it. But if somebody else will pick it up entirely, that's good, because that's evolution, that's evolving. And I also coach people on how to be leaders. And the first aspect of a leader is you have empowered your people to leave because they have the skills and the ability, but they don't want to leave because they find you to be a person that supports their growth. A leader does not tell people what to do. A leader models the way and supports. That's what we need to get back to in American society. We need more models of leadership. We need less telling and more leadership modeling.
Well, believe it or not, I actually have a follow-up on the Underdog TV show.
Okay.
So if you remember, the antagonist for Underdog was a character called Overcat. I don't know if you remember that. So who is Overcat in these scenarios with education? Who's the bureaucracy, or is that the Overcat?
I love it. I think in a lot of ways, it is the absolute theft of wealth by the wealthy. And I shouldn't say wealth. Let me rephrase that. Resources. It is the theft of resources by large companies, by very wealthy individuals who don't want to share. You know, we have people out there who are, if you look at the taxation rates from post-World War II, they were massive. People were told, this is the way it's going to work. And they willingly complied, and they were happy, and they were wealthy. And you had great examples of very, very, very high living ability for folks who were working. And then somewhere in the 70s and the 80s, this changed. And the idea of trickle-down economics actually became no puddle economics. There was no trickle. And what we see people in the U.S. become, especially in education, farther and farther behind the eight ball. Starting salaries for teachers in upstate New York with a bachelor's degree are still in the $38,000 range.
Wow.
Exactly, right? Some folks with a master's degree, $41,000. And people would say out there, whoa, you only work for 10 months. Oh, no. I know a lot of folks that have to get a second job over the summer because they can't afford rent anymore. And until and many of them took student loans out. So between the student loans, the cars, the apartments, and everything else, and the fact that many teachers are spending thousands of dollars out of their own pockets for classroom materials, it's unsustainable. I have a theory. It's called the relationship theory of education support, where for a lot of folks who go into education, they're almost forced to be in a long-term relationship or a marriage in order to survive. Because, for instance, one of the teachers we have, she married an engineer, and he is constantly buying stuff for her classroom. We have another person who is married to a farmer. He's constantly growing food to not only sell on the market, but he also has a vegetable garden that she brings in so that her kids can take baskets of food home because they're so poor. This is not what a first world country should look like. This is not. We have children who we have educators who are literally going out and buying clothing to help support their children because they need it. They don't have children of their own, but they're using their salaries to buy other people's children's stuff. And I think for us, the cat are the wealth hoarders, but they're also the government bureaucrats who say, well, you got to do this. Why? Why do we got to do that? Well, we need to hold you accountable. I tell you, if there are teachers coming to work who aren't doing their job, it's not because they need to be held accountable. It's because they're burnt out. Nobody gets in this profession to screw up a kid's day. Nobody gets into this profession to not do their best. Having taught education methods courses at colleges, I'll tell you, they are some of the hardest working students I have ever met in my life. They're working in the day teaching, they're taking graduate classes in the evening, and they're producing. So nobody gets into this profession to mail it in. But, after you see year after year after year, and your psyche becomes damaged and you become emotionally injured by this constant machine, no wonder why folks are having a tough time getting up in the morning, or no wonder why folks are going in and they just can't deal with it. Because one point is there is a song called In the Living Years where they talk about every generation blames the one before. And yet what we are seeing is the generations that are coming after us are in desperate need, and there isn't really society backing up because people in writ large are exhausted. I saw the statistic and I can't remember it, but it was astronomical, the number of people needing to work a second and a third job. And this idea of side hustling, right? When did this happen? When did it happen? It happened when the economy changed. And when companies decided that they wanted to not just maximize profit, but squeeze every moment they could. And now with artificial intelligence, what I'm hearing is many of the professions will be gone. But I'll tell you something. I cannot get artificial intelligence to correctly cite research. how it just basically plugging numbers in and plugging words in, and it's a formula. It's a formula and it doesn't work. So how can I expect artificial intelligence to do more than that? Or how can I expect artificial intelligence to create something when in reality it's stealing from work that is already out there uncredited? And that's what AI is. ChatGPT steals what's on the internet. It steals people's work without citing it. And every time we move towards saying artificial intelligence is the best thing in the world, I am reminded of what Socrates said about his students who refuse to memorize. They're wasteful. Or what happened in the 1830s when pencil and paper were introduced to schools. And they said, oh, the students will become lazy and won't actually learn because they'll rely upon this pencil and paper to write things down.
Wow.
Yes, tools are good, but it's the person that utilizes the tool. That's what we've got to develop. And again, like I mentioned before, after World War II, Germany and Japan, which were two of the greatest economies in the world, spent astronomical amount of money on educating their citizens. They value educators. They value people for people's sakes. And if your audience walks away with one thing, you have the power as a citizen to change the government by voting. I don't care how you vote, because I'm going to disagree with at least half of you on your vote. But what I want you to do is I want you to exercise that right. And I want you to get involved. I want you to say, you know what? I don't like this. I don't understand something. Explain it to me. Or I understand it. I question your decision. Because here's the point, folks. As citizens, right? You can get elected to that school board. You can run for local village office or town council. You can be part of the planning board. All it takes is for you to step up and say, you know what, I'm going to give up a little bit of my time. And I'm going to use what expertise I have. And I'm going to go forth. And I'm going to say, I want my community to be better. That's what we need people to do.
Oh, okay. So I only have a couple questions left as we start to wind down this conversation. So I'm curious, you've been an adjunct professor at several New York colleges over the years. So tell me about the New York Delta chapter of the Sigma Phi Epsilon fraternity's University Partner of the Year Award that you...
Oh, yes. I was so honored. So when I was at Rensselaer Polytechnical Institute, there was a group of students who were part of this fraternity. And I had been a member of Alpha Phi Omega after I earned my Eagle Scout. And they had asked if I could come in and give them a talk about some area of effort. And that was, how do you plan a better service project? How do you plan community service? And I went, I can do this. So I just kept saying yes to these young men as they asked me to come in. And after a while, after a few years, they said, hey, Casey, by the way, you've given us 2 very solid years of awesomeness, and we'd like to give you this award. And I was like, oh, okay. Come to find out, it was a major national award. And I was very honored because all I did was what I thought should be done, which is to share my knowledge. And they were just so excited. And I got to tell you, I'm still to this day, and it's almost been 10 years, I am still tickled pink that my brothers, because they inducted me as an honorary brother, did this effort for this award. You know, I have to say it came out of the blue. I had no idea. I just thought I was doing what any good person would do, which is they asked for help and I gave the help. So that was kind of awesome.
That is awesome. I don't know what the degrees of awesomeness are, but this must be like top level of awesomeness. That's
yeah, cool. It ranks right up there. I mean, you know, it's one of the top 5 memories of my life.
That's incredible. All right, so last question I've got for you. how can my listeners reach you if they want to work with you or have questions for you? And how can they buy your books? How can they get those?
Well, let's start with the easy one. Buying my books, either go to Amazon, go to Barnes & Noble's website, or go to the publishers, EduMatch or School Rubric, or Bloomsbury Lexington series. They're all there. I highly recommend that if they want to reach me, I am on Twitter at KCJ_EDU. I also am on LinkedIn, Casey Jacobowski. I have an Instagram page, CTJ Solutions. I have a Facebook page, CTJ Solutions, DragonTamer.us website. There's a lot of places. They can email me. I usually pop up if they just do a Google search for DragonTamer.us. And again, I'm more than willing to work with people. I usually give them a half-hour free consult, and then if we agree that we're going to go forward, then we start negotiating a contract. One of the cool things is that for folks who have been downsized, I'm running a special. If I help you by doing a resume review, and I also get a little bit of imposter syndrome coaching with you, I'll take 25% off my flat rate through December 31st, because nobody wants to be unemployed as they head into the holiday season. And what's really cool, Melvin, is that I appear at occasional conferences. I'm going to be the keynote speaker at the Oneonta Catskill Regional Teacher Center. I would be honored if I could do a TEDx talk. I really would. So if there's any folks looking for a keynote for a TEDx, come get a hold of me. I think I'm interesting. I hope I'm interesting.
You are very interesting. It's been great having you as a guest today.
Thank you, Melvin. I am honored to appear on your podcast. You are one of the best ranked podcasts and most entertaining, with some interesting people.
I appreciate that. Thank you. So our guest today has been author and professor, Dr. Casey Jacobowski. So Dr. J, as we'll call you, thanks so much for joining me today. I appreciate this conversation.
Thank you, Melvin. My honor and privilege.
So if you're new here, please subscribe and follow this podcast so you never miss an episode, and please share it with a friend. I'd greatly appreciate that. That's it for this week's episode of Stories from Real Life. Join us again next time for another great storytelling journey. Until then, don't forget to shine your light wherever you go.
That was Stories from Real Life. Join us again next week for another great storytelling journey. See you next time.